So if you hadn't heard, Resident Evil is getting turned into a TV series for Netflix, which means it'll either be a massively popular cultural phenomenon that wins piles of awards, or a completely unseen phantom product you only ever find out exists because the algorithm drops it into your autoplay when you run out of new BoJack Horseman episodes, the only two types of content on Netflix. Now, nobody seems to know whether or not this is happening along with or instead of the previously announced reboot of the Resident Evil movie franchise. Now that the filmmakers behind that have moved on to a Monster Hunter movie because it's presumed to do very well in China, pretty much. You know, the Resident Evil movies are this weirdo outlier in the whole video game movie discussion where for some reason it's been forgotten that there actually has been at least one long-running, consistently successful, at the box office at least, game adaptation that lasted a pretty good stretch. I assume some of that is because the longer it went on, the less it actually had to do with the core Resident Evil storyline. But then again, the better Resident Evil games also tended to have as little to do as possible with the core Resident Evil storyline. So I don't know what to tell you beyond observing that I mark my development into a mature understanding of cross-media literacy to be when I went from hating the Resident Evil movies for diverging from the plot of the games to thinking, oh, thank God they didn't keep the plot from the games.
You let yourself be captured so you could lead your people to this base!
I have no idea what you're babbling about.
You don't fool me! I am Alfred Ashford, commander of this base.
Oh? You must be one of Umbrella's lower-level officers if you're in command of a backwater base like this one.
How dare you! The Ashford family is among the world's first and finest. My grandfather is one of the original founders of Umbrella, Inc.
Not that anyone is going to mistake the Resident Evil movies for being good. It's a series of mid-budget B-movie sci-fi horror action hybrids, mainly notable for carrying the specifically chintzy late 90s aesthetic thereof, several years past the point when the rest of the film industry had moved on. They're dumb, they're fun, they average out pretty solid overall for what they are, and while this is probably still heresy for some reason, I'm sorry, being faithful to the games probably wouldn't have made them any better. Like, on a narrative level, the Resident Evil movies are stupid, but the Resident Evil games, again, on a narrative level, are stupid, but also convoluted, bloated, pretentious, and at least that one time, weirdly racist. I mean, look, Resident Evil's place as a landmark gaming franchise can't be denied, but they weren't putting down stakes based on how rich and interesting a scenario they could communicate. The big innovation with Resident Evil was, whoa, graphics are finally good enough to make gross, scary monsters, so let's do that. Okay, so what's in there with the monsters? I don't know, maybe cops, I guess, and I guess a bunch of incomprehensible anime bullshit also. Now, the main knock against the Resident Evil movies from fans of the games tends to be that instead of focusing on the cheesy, one-dimensional protagonist from the series, the films instead followed a new cheesy, one-dimensional protagonist called Alice, played by actress Milla Jovovich, the wife of longtime Resident Evil producer and sometime writer-director Paul W.S. Anderson, seen here winning at life, pretty much. You know, he also did the first Mortal Kombat and Event Horizon. This guy's alright. I mean, if nothing else, Alice is a fun present in the Resident Evil movies, and not only because it's eventually clear we're just watching a fun couple put on a big silly cyberpunk burlesque fashion shoot and write it off as work every couple of years. Jovovich has always been an interesting action star. She's sort of the B-movie Angelina Jolie in a lot of ways, and it's kind of amusing seeing Alice kind of god mode her way through the franchise, getting and losing different powers, weapons, and abilities, changing sides, adding to her weird backstory. It often makes the movies feel more classically video gamey than the actual video games, especially in the weird moments where they remind you that the goofy-ass plot of the games is still sort of supposed to have been going on somewhere off to the side this whole time.
Chris and Claire Redfield, you've really become quite an inconvenience for me.
I told you I'd be bringing a few friends.
You should have brought more.
Yeah, that was weird. Thinking on it, I've never been one of these people who thinks there's some secret special trick required to make video game adaptations work, or that there's some unique quality to the medium that makes games harder to adapt than anything else. If you can make a good Lego movie, you can make a good anything movie. But since movies generally tend to have a story and a lot of game narratives are either bad, thin, or non-existent sometimes, an adaptation has to get creative about how you do it. And while I doubt there was that much meta thinking going into creating Alice for Resident Evil beyond let's get get a somewhat simple, workable character into this thing who's not all bound up in the dumb nonsense mythology and just have them shoot the zombies. If for some reason that last sequel had decided to reveal that we've been watching some gamer's modded player character zip through the games, it probably would have felt a lot more clever than it had any right to. Not saying that kind of thing is the solution, but having suffered through dreary-ass slogs like Assassin's Creed or that last Tomb Raider movie, which, admit it, you forgot that even happened, you have to wonder. Or at least I do. Just a thought.